All right, Patreon members. Well, thanks for tuning in to this interview. I have Dr. Haskell Hart with me, the chemist and author, and has a lot to do with studying DNA. And Dr. Hart, I'm going to have you fill in the good stuff there. What would you like the good people to know about yourself?
Well, I'll give you a little background.
All right.
I do have a PhD in chemistry, and I spent 10 and a half years teaching chemistry, physical, and general chemistry at UNC Wilmington in North
Okay.
Carolina. And then I got a analytical chemistry job at Shell in Houston at the research center, one of the two. And then became research manager and retired after 20 and a half years there. And as far as Bigfoot, I mean, well, I remember when the Patterson-Gimlin film came out in
Oh
1967.
my goodness. Really?
And well,
Wow.
I'm 77 years old, so I'm
No,
most
you're
most of
no
you, most of you folks weren't even
Haskell.
born then. So, of course, by then I was just about to get my first job,
Hmm.
and so that interested me. But I really didn't follow the field that much over the years. Occasionally, I'd read an article that came out, somebody saw something or whatever. But then in 2013, when Melba Ketchum and her co-authors published their study,
Hmm.
that was a big news item, and that caught my attention again.
Okay.
And I thought, well, gee, this is great with DNA. You should be able to tell for sure where this species lies in the tree of life, and this issue may be resolved. And so I got I paid my $30, which you had to at the time to get the downloaded paper, and that was fine. That's not unusual, really. And I got into it, and of course, my background is not biochemistry per se. I'm a physical, analytical, and inorganic chemist, but I have a very broad chemistry education, and
Okay.
I've known about DNA since I was in college. And people in my research group at Harvard were also involved in molecular biology and protein crystallography. So I learned a lot of things from
Wow.
them as well, even though that wasn't my research focus. So I got into this paper, and to be honest, a lot of it I did not understand at first. But I went into the literature and learned what I had to learn. I mean, I have enough of a background. I can learn a lot of this stuff. People say, oh, well, you're not a geneticist and you're not this and you're not that. But people with a good education do different things. And by the way, the Watson and Crick, who got the Nobel Prize for DNA, one was
Hmm.
a microbiologist and one was a physicist, and their their Nobel Prize was in physiology and medicine, and they used organic chemistry to do it.
Wow.
Not that I'm anywhere near as great as those people in terms of my accomplishments, which are pretty minimal. But I just want to emphasize that, you don't have, people are saying, well, he's not a geneticist, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, not true. And
Right.
frankly,
Right.
this whole project, if I had a really good BS chemistry honors student, I
Hmm.
think he could have gone a long way with this, with coaching,
Oh
of
wow.
course, and so
Hmm.
so anyway, I got into this. I started learning things, and the more I looked into it, the uh, less viable the whole premise was to me. And in order to do this, you have to do searches in the database, Genbank, it's called, the biggest one. of the sequences that were published by Ketchum et al. There were
Okay.
3 nuclear DNA sequences, and then there were another 18, I think is the number of mitochondrial DNA sequences. And you can't really make any comments about how good this paper is or whether the conclusions are true without taking those sequences and searching them against the database and seeing what you find.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, and really, I had high hopes. I thought that this would be great. I'd learn a little bit more about DNA and how to identify wildlife species, and this
Sure.
would be proven. And I didn't know Melba Ketchum before or any of her co-authors. I was hoping for the best, but I was disappointed. A basic summary: the nuclear DNA sequences were way less than a genome, which she advertised that she had sequenced. Um, they're they're less than 1% of the genome, each of them, and one matched very well a bear, and later when I got even more data, a black bear exactly. One was very, very human. Now you can
Okay.
say Sasquatch may be human or a human mutant, so
Okay.
that's okay. But there was a lot of contamination there. The biggest hits were actually fungus, and so
A
that
fungus, really?
yeah, several different
Oh, wow.
fungi matched much better than anything else. But then if you reduce your requirement for the score, you will get some human matches. So it's human
Hmm.
contaminated. And then
Okay.
the third one matches a dog. And now dogs, because we breed them for different characteristics, their DNA differs from one another a little bit more than humans does from humans. Okay, you and I are much closer than, say, a boxer and a poodle. Okay, but
Okay.
they're pretty close. They all basically come from the wolf. Um, uh, Canids, I mean dogs, and coyotes and dingoes in Australia, they're all very related to the wolf. So with that in mind, that was the best hit. I mean, I got very good hits on, and that sample was from a bite mark and a downspout, some blood. Um, of course, the one that came out to be the bear was that piece of flesh that Justin Smaja found after he had claimed to have shot 2 Sasquatch. But 5 weeks later, he goes out in the woods with somebody, and they find this piece of flesh and hair, and that's what was sent to Melba Ketchum. So there's not
Hmm.
even any connection really between that and what he said he shot, if he actually did. It's just something found under 2 feet of snow 5 weeks later. So,
Oh,
I'm not
man. Yeah.
surprised
Okay.
it comes
Yeah.
out, and it's contaminated with dog. I found some dog DNA in there. And of course, he went out hunting with his dog. His dog was there and helped him find that. So I'm sure it got slobbered all over. And these kind of things matter, but you really
Mm-hmm.
have to do some searches with the BLAST software with the National Center for Biotechnology. And any other comments and this and that are not nearly as critical as how you compare these certain sequences. And very few people have done that. Not that
Hmm.
it's so difficult. They tell you how to do it, and it's really not that hard. I had to learn from scratch, and it didn't take that long. And I've taught 2
Gotcha.
other people how to do it, so over the phone. So, that's
S-
so that's where we are. And okay, it's 7 years later,
Okay.
no, 8 years later by now. And so about a year and a half ago, I decided that I had a lot of things published on my blog about this subject and the Ketchum research. And I thought, well, I think I ought to put this all together into a book,
Okay.
and so that people will have it in one place. It's not going to be a bestseller by any means. People have to be really into this to even want to start reading it.
Sure.
But so that took about a year, and during the virus and stuff, I had more time because I was at home and not out
Gotcha. Yep.
about as
Yep.
much. And still, it took about a year before I finally got it out. And then I've made a
Wow.
couple of corrections since there were some minor formatting things, and I've cleaned that up a bit. And so, so that's where we are. I've gotten mostly favorable responses from people who read all the way through it. Some people didn't like the cover, but don't judge a
Well, I
book by
was
its
gonna
cover.
ask, it's like, how has it been received in the community?
Yeah,
You know?
mostly positive, but there are those who believe that Melba Ketchum
Hmm.
is God's gift to citizens, science, and the anti-establishment, and they're going to believe her no matter what she says, and they're not going to bother to do the critical kind of things I did to see if any of it's correct. So she'll always have those followers, and it's kind
Sure.
of like it's almost a folk hero kind of thing, in my opinion.
Gotcha.
But it hasn't sold that many books. I paid tax on $275 in royalties. So, and I've
Gotcha.
given away a lot of books just to get them out to people that I wanted to make sure had read it. And so, it's a modest venture, let's put it that way. At this point, anyway.
Right. It sounds like it's the first big, I mean, once you get your book out there, that's a big step, you know, just getting all that stuff off a blog and into a book that someone can hold. Like, that's really cool. I am curious though, and I know it's a step back to the beginning of the interview, but I'm curious, can you elaborate more, like what it was like? So how old were you when the PG film came out? Like, you remember that coming out, you
Yeah,
said.
well, let's see, I was born in 1943, so
Okay.
that makes me 24 years old, I guess.
Wow, you're
I was in graduate
24.
school. I was in graduate school at the time. And, I did notice it in the news, and I didn't pay too much attention to it. I thought it was interesting. Certainly, it was the best visual evidence
Yeah.
up to the point, and I would say probably still today, um, because of
Oh man.
its clarity, a
Oh
lot of
yeah, sure.
pictures are kind of blurry, and this was a whole 1 minute video, so gosh. And I have read Bill Munn's book on this film. He's a costume designer and film aficionado, I'd say.
Okay.
And he thought that, the name of his book, by the way, is When Roger Met Patty.
Mm-hmm.
And he concluded with a lot of scientific evidence that this film is genuine and it is not
Mm,
somebody in a costume.
gotcha.
And that impressed me. Now, that's not the last word necessarily, but
Right. So when you're 24, um, was it in the papers? Was it in uh the like how do you remember hearing about it first, reading about it or hearing about it or
yeah, I think I read it in the newspaper,
oh
and
man, that's awesome.
yeah, because I didn't watch TV then as much as I do now. And as a graduate student, I only had a really wonky black and white TV and went to the student center to watch serious news. So I'm pretty sure I saw it first in a newspaper or possibly a magazine.
So then you're in your 30s in the 70s then, correct?
Yes, that's correct. That
So
is
you
correct.
remember the whole era of when the Bigfoot movies came out, like on the
Yeah,
search of, you know,
vaguely.
in
I'm not
search of
sure I
Bigfoot.
went to many of them at all. I don't
But
remember.
yeah,
But that, yeah, And then there was the Fawk Monster, and all that came out a little
Oh
later.
man. So you remember when like the Legend of Boggy Creek came out
Yeah, I do.
originally? That is
Yeah,
so
and I
cool.
think I saw it way back then too. I've since watched it again a time or two.
Wow. Wow.
But, but none of that was all that relevant because
Yeah. Okay.
we didn't have DNA to sequenced at that point to the
Sure.
extent we do
Sure.
now. And so that was just kind of a little interest. And the DNA sequencing thing really got going in the 80s.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Sanger's sequencing technique, and then even later with more modern techniques that can sequence much quicker, much bigger genomes, segments of DNA, and so on. So it's it's really to me the gold standard. And
Mm,
people will say that because you don't have a Sasquatch standard to compare it to,
okay.
you'll never know what you have, but that's not true. New species are discovered all the time,
Oh,
including
for real.
primates, monkeys,
Yep.
and things. And what they do is they get their DNA sequence and they compare it to related species. And then there's a method of statistically drawing a phylo tree, which is like a
Mm,
tree of life that shows you where this
gotcha.
new species sits in relation to other monkeys or whatever it is. And that is very definitive. I mean, of course, most of these people also have video. They've got specimens. They took the blood for the DNA from the animal. They didn't pick it up in the woods on hair or something, which we don't know where it came from. So that's one of the problems. Most of this DNA that people have analyzed came from initially unknown sources. That
Mm,
is, once they analyze it, they could say what it was. And I go through this in that paper in the Relic Hominoid
okay.
Inquiry. There were some interesting, very good studies. One found a horse. It was in the Himalayas. I thought they had a Yeti or something. No, it was a horse. And another one was a buffalo in Canada. A couple of Canadians, people said they saw Sasquatch, and they got hair from nearby, but it turned out to be a buffalo. And
Really.
so, there's, as of this point, nobody has definitely analyzed any DNA that could be reasonably said to be an unknown hominid.
So I'm going to make a statement with my complete lack of training with everything to do DNA. 100%. So get ready. So
Okay, I'm ready.
what do you think about this? So um we're not going to be able to prove Bigfoot exists with DNA unless we have an actual specimen to get the proven DNA from, so then we can have the standard and then we can use the standard.
Mhm.
Is that an accurate way of looking at
I
it, or
think
what do you think?
that's a very good, true statement. Biologists, zoologists are rather tough on identifying new species. I mean, you have to have good evidence, and finding stuff out in the woods that you don't know where it came from, it could have been, it's not nearly as good as finding a body, let's say a dead winter kill or something. I'm gonna go out in a couple of weeks and look for some winter kills in Oklahoma because it's been such a bad winter. If I
Hmm.
could find a dead body, I mean, that would be so great. And then you take the DNA from that after you've got the specimen, you've measured it in all different ways, you've taken pictures, then you have something convincing. And you're right, then that DNA becomes a standard for other people to compare, even if they don't have a body. Maybe they have some blood on a tree or on a rock or something. But if you have something definite to compare it to, that can be valid data.
That's awesome. Do you think that in your thoughts, do you think that DNA study is going to close the book on if Bigfoot is real, or what evidence do you think is going to
Yeah,
close the case in the eyes of the American public?
yeah. Well, I
What do you
think
think?
as you hinted a little bit
Yeah.
earlier, some sort of physical specimen is probably going to be required. And then DNA from that would be great because it would then tell us, is this closer to apes or closer
Mm,
to humans? Personally, I think it's way smarter than a chimpanzee. So my bet is on that it's going to be closer to human.
okay.
How close? I mean, I can't say, but we'll see if we get some decent DNA. And yes, I think it can close I think the skeptics, the mainstream scientists, of which I've communicated with a couple, I think they'd be convinced if we got the kind of evidence that's normally um, produced for new species, like a whale washes up on the beach. They just found one in Florida, some new species
Oh
that
wow.
they had thought was maybe part of another species or something. And yeah, it washes up. You make a bunch of measurements, you dissect it, you get the bones, and you do the DNA. And if it doesn't match any known whale species, and it's sufficiently different, that's not just a little aberration, you got a new species, you know. And this is no different. It has to be held to the same standards, you know, to be believable.
What would be the least in order to get the standard, would you need a full specimen, or what is the least amount that you would, you know what I mean?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Now, there's two kinds of DNA. The
Okay.
nuclear DNA, our own is 3.3 billion base pairs in, 24 chromosomes. You've heard about that. And then there's the mitochondrial DNA that comes from the mitochondria and is only 16,568 base pairs, much smaller. And
Okay.
there's much more of it because there's only two copies of the nuclear DNA, one from each of your parents, but there's hundreds of copies of mitochondrial DNA because there's dozens of mitochondria and each of them has dozens of uh, uh, DNA sequences, DNA strands. It's a circle actually, comes back on itself. So I would, and most people that are trying to identify new species and stuff use the mitochondrial because it's more abundant and therefore you don't need as much to do the
Okay.
analysis. And trace analyses are more possible. They can get it off of a fingerprint. These crime laboratories can,
Mm,
or something you touched, you don't need a whole lot, but you need a lot more. You need a blood sample or something to do a usually, or a good bone sample to do a nuclear DNA complete sequence. So I would say there's enough information in the mitochondria. If you got even out of that 15,000, if you were able to prime for what they call the hypervariable region, you'd get enough information in about 300 to 400 base pairs, not a complete genome, to prove where this animal stood in the tree of life.
wow.
So that's your best bet, and you can get that out of hair. If you
Okay.
have enough medulla in the center of the hair, that's where the DNA is. People have done considerable analyses, including those two I mentioned earlier, the horse and the buffalo. Those were done on hair samples, and they had 300 to 400 base pairs, and that's plenty. That'll tell you that it's not a dog, it's not a cat, it's not a chimpanzee even, and it's something else. So that's what I would, if I got some hair samples that I thought I saw come from an animal that looked like a Bigfoot, that's what I would ask for. Because it's fairly
Man,
certain they could get it if I had enough hair. They
that,
have
oh man,
done sequencing on a 0.5 centimeter of hair. At
wow.
Mitotyping Technologies in Pennsylvania, they're very good at this. And that's the one that Sykes used in his study. But they took some samples that were about to be destroyed from the forensic laboratories of the police, and the cases were closed, and they didn't identify whose hair it was, but they were over 10 years old, some of them, and they took a 0.5 centimeter, and they were able to get a DNA sequence that made sense, you know.
Wow. That is really cool.
It is, it's
Um,
amazingly sensitive because they
yeah.
amplify the DNA. They make multiple copies of it. So um, in an hour, they can increase the amount of DNA by copying it billions of times, even more.
Man. Are there who do you think the top names in the field are right now of scientists that are looking to prove Sasquatch with DNA analysis?
Yeah.
Not to put you on the
Well,
spot. I mean,
I'll tell you what, a bunch of them have given it a shot. Now, unfortunately, Brian Sykes passed away in
mm,
December.
oh
He's
wow.
the Briton from Oxford,
Mm-hmm.
and he did a paper on 30 different hair samples from all over the world. He solicited some of them from these monasteries in Tibet and stuff that
Oh
everybody thought
wow.
was Sasquatch, and none of the samples one came out human, and it was exactly, it matched exactly the human standards. So, you know, if Sasquatch
Mm,
is that human, maybe that's it. And
that's
everything
true.
else was a
Yeah.
known animal, 29 known animals.
Wow.
Um, and he did it with, I think, fairly small samples of hair. He used that mitotyping technology lab in Pennsylvania. And that paper, by the way, is in Nature, and it's free access. So you don't have to pay for it. Anybody wants to look it
So
up?
it's on, you said it's online.
Yeah, online. Nature has a website. And
Oh
if
yeah,
you
the
look
magazine
up,
Nature.
yeah, it's a
Yeah, yep.
journal. If you
Okay.
look up Sykes in 2014, you'll find the paper.
Okay.
And
Awesome.
it's very good reading. It's not difficult for a novice to understand, and but it does lay out exactly what he did, and um, people have some misconceptions that could straighten out there. That
Interesting.
came out a year and a half, or almost a year and a half after the Ketchum paper.
Oh, okay. Was it well, no, never mind. So Brian is no longer with
Yeah.
us. Is Are there any other names
Okay.
that are currently
All right.
still, you
Getting
know?
back to your question, I'm
Yeah,
sorry I
yeah.
got on a
No, no problem,
tangent.
no problem. Yeah.
Um, Another molecular anthropologist, I think he calls himself, Todd Disatel
Yep.
at New York University,
Yep.
has done some analyses. Unfortunately, the ones I remember hearing about turned out human. And, he has not done an extensive study from a really good sample, I don't
Mm,
believe, that I know of, that he's made public anyway. But he's got the background. He's a geneticist. His main field is primate evolution. So that's very apropos,
sure.
much more relevant than physical chemistry, I have to say. And so, he will do analyses. I think he charges. I don't know what his rates are. And I think he once said, and I don't want to hold him to this, but at one point he said, if it turns out to be something that could be a Sasquatch, then you won't have to pay. But
Everyone's been paying so far.
that was a while back, and you'd
Yeah,
have to
right.
get up with him.
Yep.
But he's one person with a fairly open mind. You
Yeah.
may remember he was one of the hosts of this $1 million Bigfoot program.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yep.
Remember?
You're right. You're right. Yep.
Justin Smasha was one of the competitors, and there were other known people in the field,
Yep.
and he and Natalia, forget her last name, who's a primatologist and actress and a lot of other things, were the hosts. And I think the main thing that came out of it, none of the teams found any really good Sasquatch samples,
Right.
but they focused a lot on the techniques of collecting these samples without contaminating them and what to look for physically when you do collect them, because DNA analyses are kind of expensive, and you really ought to look at these in a microscope, for example, first, and
Yeah.
hair samples, and you can eliminate a lot of animals that way. And there are ambiguities with hair analysis, but primates have very thin to non-existent medulla in the center of the hair shaft.
Really.
And if you get these huge medullas, you got a cow, a horse, a bear, something else. So it's kind of a filter, you know? If you get a thin medulla, that doesn't mean it's human necessarily or a primate, but at least it excludes a lot of other wildlife.
Sure.
And then you can go spend your money on something that's maybe more promising
Okay.
than a cow sample. And I've been looking at some recently that somebody gave me that he got sent to him, and there's horse and cow, and there's maybe one set that might be primate. I'm still looking at it, but
Wow. That's cool.
I'm not gonna give you any names or anything, because that's up to him.
That's no problem. That's
Yeah,
no
but,
problem at all. Yep.
and I'm not the expert on this. There are other
Hmm.
people who've been doing this hair analysis a lot longer.
Sure.
Cindy Wilson is one in British Columbia, and she's done some Sasquatch samples, or alleged Sasquatch samples.
Did you say Cindy Wilson?
Dosen, Dosen.
Okay.
She has a Facebook page. It's called Hominoid Enigma. Enigma, I think, something like that. And you can look her up.
Gotcha.
Her name's
Yeah.
fairly,
Yeah. Totally.
yeah. And she's she takes it seriously. She does a lot of different examinations. Um, and she's done a lot more of this than I have. And so
Wow.
now, just to be honest, in the Ketchum paper, the guy who looked at her hair samples in a microscope, he got it all wrong. I mean, experts can be misled depending on what their experience is. He should have identified that sample 26 as a bear. It's clearly a bear. The medulla is too wide for human, and it's got corpuscles in it. There are little cells, and that's not human-like at all. And you look at a bear
Interesting.
standard, and it matches it just perfectly. I wrote a blog on that, and it's in my book too. And so he didn't do a good job, or he wasn't experienced enough, you know? And there are references out there online, Alaskan Fur Project. There's another one, Fur of Mammals of Texas, put out by Texas Tech. And they've got pictures, and they describe in words the hair samples. And if you don't have your own sample, which I'm building up a collection of by roadkills.
Oh, so you're serious? Like you're actually
Oh,
going
yeah.
out, getting roadkill and using that to build up your
Well,
sample database.
I've never actually gone on a road trip with that as my purpose.
Okay,
There's a
but
lot
it's
of
like,
roadkills out here in the hill country of Texas.
I
I
get
see
it.
a dead animal. Of course, you know, there are dozens of deers. I had that one a long time ago. But
Right.
I see some small mammal, and I stop. I've got fox, raccoon, possum, skunk,
Oh, wow.
coati, I mean ringtail,
Yep. Yep.
squirrel, And you can buy these slides as well from Carolina Biological Supply. They'll give you a set of 20 or 12 or something, reasonable priced, and they're all mounted, and you don't have to go out picking up stuff off the road.
So then why do you go? That's my question is, so you want to get the samples yourself instead of buying it from?
Well, they don't have all the animals. They don't have
Oh, okay.
a
Okay.
ringtail. I don't think they had a squirrel. It's a small collection for
I
students,
got you.
just to give students a feel for the variability. They have
Mm,
a dog, a cow, a horse, a cat. I think they had a rat, a possum, and a couple more, but nowhere near
gotcha.
the whole spectrum. They didn't have a bear, for example.
Oh, wow.
But yeah. So, but there are good pictures online. The FBI has they have a science series, and one of their papers deals with animal hairs, and they've got some pretty good pictures. But you can get better ones yourself, I found,
Okay. Gotcha.
if you have a sample. And, it's a process. If I see something, I'll go look and collect some hair. If I don't, I don't. I go about my business,
Well,
But
that's
it
true.
is,
So you're just getting that, you just have to get a few hairs and then you're done. Like I keep forgetting that it's you're focusing on the hairs.
well, that's for just the hairs. That would just
Yeah.
be a preliminary screening, okay?
Okay.
And then if I see something that's none of these animals that I have a hair sample for, or any others that are likely that are in somebody else's book or online, then
Mm-hmm.
and if it's a thin medulla or no medulla, then there's a chance it's a primate. It could be a human though.
Yeah.
I don't think you can tell. There have been some people who've tried to suggest that the hairs they had were a little different than the human or any other primate, any other ape, but it's pretty sketchy. I don't think you'll be able to say for sure, because we don't have
Sure.
uh, chimps and orangutans running around in central Texas. So if it's a
Could you
primate,
imagine?
yeah, things aren't confusing enough.
Oh man, if you did.
So, if it's a primate, it's either a human, that
Yeah.
go out there and their hair blows off and they're riding horses and it blows
Yep.
and stuff, or it could be something different. But you can definitely very easily eliminate a deer, a dog, a cow, a horse, a fox, a possum, a skunk, a squirrel, a rabbit. And, that's about, and I've got porcupine and armadillo too. All those are different from human or primate.
Wow.
And, there aren't a whole lot of other things, a few rats and moles and mice and stuff, but they're kind of different too. So at least you can say you're not going to be spending upwards of $2,000 and maybe much more, for something that's obviously not a good candidate.
Gotcha. Yeah.
You see?
So your next, what's the next step? Do you feel like you've accomplished what you set out to do, or is there a lot more to do for Dr. Hart? What do you think?
Well, initially, my goal was to verify the Ketchum results, and I hoped it
Mm-hmm.
would be positive. I really did.
Yep.
You have to believe me. I can't prove it, but I had no skin in the game,
Yep.
and I have no laboratory to do any analyses on my own, from raw samples. So my initial goal was to check that out, and I think I have, and I've pretty well um, finished that. But in the process, I got interested in trying to find some evidence myself out in the woods, and I've been out in Oklahoma a bit and Texas, and I'm going to continue to look, and maybe after this severe winter,
Yeah.
I'm lucky, maybe there's some shreds of the body left. It'll probably have been
Mm.
scavenged
Oh
and
yeah.
eaten up, but if you get a couple of the right bones, a skull would be the best, of course. Or enough flesh or hair to get DNA, that would be very significant. So
When you're going to Oklahoma, well, I guess you're going to Oklahoma more to look for roadkill, you said, right?
Well, this would be in the woods. I'd be
Okay.
lucky to see one on the road. I'm
Okay.
always looking, but
Yeah.
I go out on forest roads and look around and camp.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
crazy how Oklahoma has that southeast corner where it's like,
right.
you have the NAWAC and, they have that area X and man, that stuff is wild.
Yeah,
I
they've
don't know if,
had a
yeah.
lot of sightings and other evidence. They haven't brought home a DNA sample, though, to my knowledge.
No.
They sent one to Lucerne, the group that worked with Sykes,
Okay.
and they never got any results on it. It was a
Oh,
hair
wow.
sample. And I think they have the sample was still in the collection. I found out through a friend, and so they maybe can get it back and do something, but they need to get
Hmm.
some more samples. They see so many things and hear so many things and have rocks thrown at them and
That's wild.
all that
That's wild.
stuff. Somewhere there's got to be some evidence that could be analyzed. I hope anyway.
Yeah.
But they've been at it for over 15 years, so
Oh yeah, no, they totally have. It's wild. Um, if there's listeners where they're like, man, I really want to dig into this, what would you say is besides checking out, your book, of course, are there other things that you recommend that are required reading? And I guess we've mentioned Brian Sykes' article as well, but anything else
yeah.
that comes to mind to check out?
If you're particularly interested in the DNA aspect, look at some of the references in that RHI article,
Mm-hmm.
which
Okay.
includes Sykes, of course,
Okay.
and Ketchum, and the two others I mentioned, the horse and the bison, and some
Perfect.
other interesting related articles. I would look at those.
Okay.
And I did put together an incomplete biography of some interesting books that I had come across.
Mm.
Uh, I have a reference list in my book of cited articles, but then I have a bibliography of some other interesting books,
Oh, perfect.
and they're all related on DNA or Sasquatch or both. And I'm not pushing my book. I mean, if people want to buy it, fine. But there is a bibliography there too. And
Awesome.
there are others elsewhere. I mean, that's not the only
Mhm.
place. If you go to Amazon and you search Sasquatch, you'll find some other interesting books.
Oh yeah, I mean, we can always do the Amazon search, but I like asking
Yeah.
one of the guys that lives it, you know what I mean? But
Okay. What have I
yeah,
read? And yes, I've read these
yeah.
books, and I can recommend them. But
Totally.
they're
Yeah.
not the only ones out there. And
Yep.
it depends on where you're starting as to what you want to read, and how much time you have and so on.
Well, yeah,
I'm
that's the
not
thing,
an
right?
avid reader. I'm a pretty slow reader because being a scientist, I never learned to speed read because
Mm.
every little subscript makes a
Yep.
difference.
Yep.
You can't just gloss over an equation with all these super and subscripts, And
Exactly.
I'm much better than I was 20, 30 years ago, but so I haven't read all the books out there by any means. Somebody like, I don't know if you know Daniel Perez, he has, I think, the largest collection of
He
books.
does. Yeah. I would love to talk to him someday. Yeah.
Well, I think he'd be amenable to an interview. I
Hmm.
just met him recently and we
Oh,
talked.
you did?
Yeah, we talked well, I met him on the phone.
Oh,
We
okay.
talked for about 45 minutes, and
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, I think he sounded like the kind of guy who'd be open to an interview, and I know he's done other interviews.
Do you listen to podcasts at all?
I
Okay.
don't follow him, like every week.
If
Uh,
he was just on Cliff and Willow from Finding
yes,
Bigfoot.
yes,
He
yes.
was on their podcast. That's a really, really good episode. I think you'd
I
enjoy it.
will, I will, thank you. I
Yeah,
had heard of it, but I
it's
haven't
awesome.
seen it yet. I will look at that. That looks good. Because I
But
think
yeah.
he's been in this, for over 30 years, I believe. I think
Yeah,
he
he actually
started
says 40.
70.
40, yeah. Because he started
40,
when he was
40,
17,
yeah,
which is nuts.
yeah, it is. So he's
Yeah,
got a good historical perspective on what happened
really
when,
does.
which
Really
is,
does.
which is important at times. Yeah, right.
Uh, Dr. Hart, before we start to wrap things up, are there any other things that you would want to mention? That I think we've done a really good like introductory overview of everything, but anything else that you'd want to make sure that you'd get in?
I will say one thing. I have seen a Sasquatch.
Okay, that's a pretty big thing to just throw out at the end.
It was in that area of southeast Oklahoma. Um, and I'm a very keen observer of nature. I've been a bird watcher even before I could afford any binoculars. And I've seen, thousands of different species of birds, and other things. I put wildflowers in our Chicago phone book to press them, and
Okay.
stick phone book, and it goes way back. My mother introduced me and my father to nature, so I've been a keen observer. And when I say I saw something for, I'd say 2 to 3 seconds, probably,
Yeah.
but it was in broad sunlight, which is unusual.
Wow.
And it was surrounded by greenery, which made a nice contrast against the reddish brown fur.
Okay.
And we sent somebody out there later, and the height was measured as considerably above a 6'3" person. And I wasn't able to follow it, and I was alone, so I didn't want to really do that. I didn't get another view, but I
Wow.
am convinced they're out there. And also, I've met some very credible people in this 7 years that I got involved since this
Mm,
Ketchum paper came out. And I have to believe some of their recounts of what they've seen.
mm.
And even before, but I was kind of on the fence until I saw one myself. And it's in chapter 19 of my book, by the way. So
Awesome.
I give
Awesome.
the whole
I
story
love it.
there.
I
Yeah,
love it.
and again, I, I'm a little reluctant to push this book, but it is out there. And
Hey, I'm okay with you doing it. So why not? Like
yeah,
if you put the time, here's how I see it. If you put the time into doing it, then I don't think there's anything wrong with pushing what you put your time into.
well, at
That's why I
least,
tell people about the podcast. So,
yeah, at least let people
yeah,
know it's there. If they want
exactly.
to
Yeah, yeah.
if they want to get into the DNA thing, I think
Yep.
it's one of the better sources out there for Sasquatch DNA issues.
Awesome. Awesome.
At the moment, not that there wouldn't be something better, and only that I'm aware of anyway. So, yeah, other things, keep an open mind,
Mm-hmm.
but it's all right to be skeptical
Yep.
as long as you have good reasons and good questions for the believers to challenge them, and so on.
I love it.
Healthy debates are what it's all about. And
I love it.
I don't claim to have the last word on this. I'd be delighted to have somebody take it farther. And I don't think they're going to find any major errors in my book. But if they do, I'd be happy to discuss it and own up to them if I made a mistake.
And I think that's super important. Like, that the taking feedback and the dialogue, even with people you don't agree with, that's super huge. Like, that's awesome.
Well, I hope others would do more. I've
Yeah.
had relatively little of it, actually, since I got into this. But maybe as people read the book or start looking at my blogs, I have a blog site too that's called bigfootclaims.blogspot.com. It's a Google blog.
Okay.
So people most of what's in my book
Got
is
it.
also on that blog in
Okay.
separate articles. So people can
Cool.
look there too, if they wish. Yeah.
That's awesome. Man, Dr. Hart, thank you so much for spending some time on your Saturday night. And thank you again for rescheduling and being understanding of my crazy work schedule from before. But
Well, it's been
yeah,
a really tough week here in Texas, as you know, with the
I
weather.
know.
So this
Yeah.
is not a problem. Saturday night, I finally got water after almost a
Oh
week.
man.
We got
Oh,
power a couple days ago, and
oof.
so I did my laundry and took a shower, and I'm as good as I'm gonna get.
Things are looking up. Things are looking up. Oh
Okay,
man. Thanks for
thanks for
hanging out,
having
Dr.
me.
Hart. Yep. Have a good one.